So good evening. We welcome you to KFAS and thank you for joining us tonight for the lecture titled ChatGPT, Educational and Ethical Perspectives. Many of you might have heard or came across media posts and news regarding ChatGPT. Therefore, KFAS as a catalyst has organized an overview on it. My name is Noura Damkhi and I'll be your MC host for tonight. First, allow me to extend a very warm welcome to you all. We appreciate you taking the time tonight and passing us by. We hope this lecture results in a very fruitful and engaging manner. Kindly put your mobile phones on silent and keep all your questions and answers at the end of the presentation.
Okay, thank you everyone. And thank you Ms. Noura and Dr. Hanadi and your colleagues for organizing this at KFAS. So I'll be talking about the technical aspects of ChatGPT or giving an overview of that. So ChatGPT generates human-like responses to natural language input. It's capable of answering questions, providing explanations and suggestions. It's continuously learning and improving through user feedback. And it has actually demonstrated its ability by writing short story and publishing it, showing its potential for creative applications. Now, I apologize for just reading from this, but this actually was written by ChatGPT itself. I asked it to introduce itself with 3 bullet points, then to add an example, and then to shorten the slide to fit within 30 seconds. This was the original text it generated before I asked it to shorten the slide. So models like ChatGPT rely on something that we call language models. These are computational models that are capable of predicting the next word or the probability of the next word given the previous words. So if we give it, okay, the quick brown fox jumps over the lazy, and we ask it to complete that, it could give us something like this. Okay, it could be cat, dog, fox, or plane, with dog being, the highest probability word. And because of this probabilistic nature, these models could be used to generate different text for the same prompt. So every time you hit regenerate button in ChatGPT, it could generate something different. So we'll see an example of this. So suppose we start with the quick brown fox. We give that to a trained language model, and we'll explain what that is shortly. And the model could give us output probabilities. It could say, it could be sits, eats, jumps, or runs. And the model will, we will select a word randomly based on these probabilities. So we could select the word runs. And because of this selection is probabilistic, the most likely word is not necessarily chosen all the time. So we take runs and we add it back to the input and we repeat the procedure. Now we have a different output distribution saying, okay, around is now the most likely. And notice that over is now unlikely, unlike the original sentence, which was the quick brown fox jumps over, because we selected runs in the previous time step. So if we let this run for a while, it could generate something like this: runs around the slow dog. It's probabilistic, so it's not guaranteed to generate the same phrase we're all familiar with. Until it encounters this special token, which is the end token, which tells the model to basically stop generating text. So now, how are these models trained? The idea is to basically maximize the probability of the next word given the previous word. So if we give it this phrase, again, the quick brown fox jumps over the lazy, we would like to maximize the probability that dog will be the next word, because that's what the text is. So we initially give this to an untrained language model. This is a neural network. The circles are neurons, and the connections between them are the lines. The strength of the connection is represented by the thickness of the line. And it could generate something like this, like it could predict cat to be the highest probability. But we really want dog to be the highest probability, so we recognize that the output of the model depends on the thickness of those lines. So the procedure is that we should adjust that thickness such that we increase dog and reduce the others. So after we do this adjustment, we get this new trained weights or trained connections, these orange lines, and the model would output the proper output distribution. This process is repeated for every word in the sentence. So we want to maximize the quick given the, and brown given that quick, and fox given that quick brown. So we repeat that for all the words in the text. And the good news here is that if you are just given a piece of text, you could just train the model directly on it. There is no need for any manual annotation or labeling. So unlike other machine learning kind of tasks. The important thing here is the structure of the model. And one of the things that made ChatGPT possible was the development of an architecture or a structure that made it possible for the model to really capture long dependencies in the text. So This architecture is known as the transformer, and ironically, it was developed by Google, which is the company most suffering from OpenAI's ChatGPT. The transformer, the idea behind it is that words in the past directly influence the prediction of the next word. So, and this happens through an attention mechanism. So if we have a word, it has a list of numbers, which is represented by the shaded squares, that represent what it looks for, which we call the query. And another list that corresponds to what the word represents, which we call the key. In order to make a prediction, for example, after a particular word, we check the similarity of this purple list to the blue list. So if we have a previous word, a word at position 8 and word at position 5, for example, in this example, the word at 8 is very similar to 10 in the terms of the shading pattern. So this would be strongly influential on the prediction of the next word. And the word at position 5 is unlike the word at position 10, so it's going to weakly influence the prediction. So let's take an example. The Kuwait Foundation for the Advancement of Science promotes research and innovation in, and we would like to predict the next word. In will have a particular query, a list of numbers, and in our terms, this could be something like, I'm looking for a place or something with boundaries, because it's a preposition. And for each of the previous words, there would be a list of numbers that represent what the word represents. So the list for the could say, I'm a definite article. For Kuwait, it could be, I'm a proper noun, I'm a country, I'm an oil producer, and so on. And this happens for all the words in the sentence. So based on the similarity between the purple and the blue numbers, we could calculate the strength on the prediction of the next word. So as we can see here, Kuwait is very strongly influential on the prediction because it has a very thick yellow line. And as a result, the model could predict the next word to be Kuwait. This ability allows the model to capture really long dependencies in the text. That wasn't possible easily before the transformer. A very important point is that these blue and purple lists or bags, they are learned directly from the training procedure. No one is coming in and saying that is a definite article or Kuwait is a proper noun or in is a preposition. No one is doing any of that. It's just the simple objective of predicting the next word given the previous word is enough for the model to make reasonable representations that help it make these predictions. Now the next part that made ChatGPT possible is the GPT part, is what's known as generative pre-training. So suppose we have this task, grammar classification. We are given an input sentence and we would like to figure out if it has correct grammar or not. So we hire a bunch of human labelers, we give them some sentences, we tell them, okay, tell us if this is correct or not. And the objective is to train a model that basically replaces the labelers, that can predict grammar correctness based on the sentence that is given. We could use this data set to train a model, and the model would take in the inputs and output whether the grammar is correct or not. This approach is unlikely to work because model like transformers, they are really big models. And gathering data is very expensive procedure, so typically we'll end up with really small data sets, which means you will have low model accuracy. So the idea behind GPT is basically, let's exploit all this abundance of natural text on the web, web pages, books, reports, anything. Let's use that to train a transformer model to predict the next word given the previous words. And that's it. After we complete this training, we basically freeze the transformer and we take its output and connect it to another small neural network which tackles the specific task of predicting grammar correctness. Because this orange network is small, we could train it on the small data set that we had before, this is the process known as fine-tuning. And hopefully, when the model gets the sentence, it will make the correct decision. Now, just to give you an idea of the sizes that we're dealing with here, in the pre-training stage, the dataset size that was used for the first iteration of the GPT model back in 2018 was around 4 gigabytes. GPT-3, on which ChatGPT is based, uses 700 gigabytes. So it's a huge increase, and this is mostly public data. For reference, all of English Wikipedia is around 50 gigabytes. So it's a huge amount of data. Now, the last or one of the most influential things that enabled ChatGPT is teaching GPT to follow instructions. So in this case, what they do is they collect examples of human prompts and responses, like something that you would put into ChatGPT itself. So it could be something, explain the moon landing to a 6-year-old, or explain neural nets to a math major. So this data is used to fine-tune the GPT model to predict the human response given the prompt. The paper that reported this particular method used around 15,000 manually collected prompt and responses, which is not a whole lot. We don't know how much ChatGPT uses because the paper for ChatGPT has not been published yet. Then they generate responses from the model and they let humans rank them. So again, we give a prompt to the model, and the model generates maybe a bunch of responses using the same procedure we described earlier in the lecture. It could be the moon is a natural satellite, or people went to the moon, and so on. And then we give that to human labelers, and we ask them, tell us which one is best, like basically doing all pairwise comparisons. So a human labeler could say, oh, answer B is better than A, and A is better than C, and B is better than C as well. So because of that, this is in this particular example, it could be because B is the least technical, so it matches the prompt very well.
Thank you, Noura. Thank you, Dr. Mohammad, for debunking the technology behind ChatGPT, which I believe everybody's so interested about it. I'll be just focusing on the buzz, the news buzz that is talking, everybody is talking about how unreliable this is for us as educators to be used in higher education, while it should be a wake-up call for all of us to know that this is the point where we really need to reconsider what we are doing in our classrooms these days. We should really step forward and forget about traditional teaching. With AI producing such wonderful, applications as ChatGPT, as nonsensical as it can be at this point, but one day it's going to be up there and acquiring the knowledge and producing knowledge that we would hope we would be utilizing in our classroom setting. To jump off of that, let's start by just saying that what we have, as Dr. Mohammad has indicated, there hasn't been a thoroughly, detailed research based on philosophical foundations about ChatGPT, and whatever we have at this point, or what do we mean by that? Why philosophical foundations? Because we really need to focus on the information or the knowledge that we can generate from such tools and be able to regenerate it again and help the students regenerate it again in their own, field or into their real lives. So what we need at this point is to gather as much data as we can, analyze it, and particularly put it into practice and see how effective it is into our daily lives. Therefore, what we have so far is purely driven by technology, so it's highly empirical. So we will say just take it with a grain of salt, whatever we have, but that's what we have so far. When I started researching about it, I found that there were very few studies about ChatGPT, merely about the empirical parts of it. So I went a little bit deeper to see what chatbots can do in education, and I came across a very interesting literature review done by Wolny et al., which was published in 2021. And let's start with the pure definition for us educators. I'm talking about not being traditional, but I like to take the traditional route when I come to presentations. So what a definition of a chatbot is simply it's a digital system that can be interacted with entirely through natural language via either text or voice interfaces. And we come to the question, do we really want an autonomous chatbot for each and every one of our students? Would you come across, do you think one day you will be at that stage where you will willingly allow your students to have a chatbot as an assistant in your classroom? What do you think? Yes, no? Yes? Oh, thank God, you're so open-minded. All right, great. So we came to the one of the basic findings that I found in these studies was they were focusing, most of these chatbots that were used for the past 30 years, they were basically founded in pedagogical roles. Now, to start right, what do you know about pedagogy? Does anyone know what pedagogy means? I'm a teacher, you have to answer. Raise hands. No? Pedagogy is simply the art of teaching. Simple, just to go with it as that. It's just the way you teach and your style of teaching. And usually your style of teaching is the way you like or you favored your, you had a favorite teacher one day in your life, that's the style that you really like to teach in or with. But any style of teaching needs to be informed with research and theory, so it would be highly impactful. You would need to leave an imprint in your students' lives so they can follow and maybe change it in the future, but they can keep holding the banner, as we say. But from that study, we found that there were 3 pedagogical roles that it focused, these chatbots that are used in education focused on. One was learning, the other one was assisting and mentoring. Now, when in a different study, Kumar in 2021, he published a study about like using Android applications for students who are blind. And they found that it's highly useful for these students, especially when they are used in project-based learning. Now, project-based learning is one interesting way of teaching. It focuses on the process instead of the end result. Like, instead of just teach for the test, it monitors and evaluates the student's growth, which is highly appreciated on both ends, the student and the teacher. So it found out that it can enhance the students' learning performances, their teamwork dynamic, and also their collaboration, which is something that you would need to instill as skills for them when they start working in the working force. It also indicated that it cannot, as a chatbot, it cannot help in these areas in effective emotional learning outcomes. It's a mouthful, but simply it means the perception of learning. What do you mean by learning? What is your state of knowledge? How much do you know? Also the need for cognition. When you internalize something, you just don't know the crust of the information. You go deep into understanding what that piece of information really is. Motivation, I still am struggling with it. My colleagues know how I was discussing. It's hard for me to fathom that motivation would come out of a chat bot. One day it will, but not at this point. And also creative self-efficacy, of course, to have that kind of self-confidence in your, you owning your knowledge and being able to articulate it in a meaningful way. There were 5 major objectives in that literature review that really enlightened my view of how I will be viewing ChatGPT. These 5 were simply improvement of student skills. There was the efficiency of education and increase of students' motivation, and also the increase of availability of education. Now, if we look into the improvement of student skills, it came at a roaring 32%, which means it falls in naturally, because when we teach, we really are teaching our students skills of how to learn. You don't teach content, you teach them the skill on how to base off their knowledge acquiring and start applying it into their daily lives. And when we go to efficiency of education, it's simply just how impactful this education or like their field of education is, and which scored a quarter of the 74 studies that they've collected for this literature review. And also for the increased motivation of students, although I'm a little bit skeptical, but it came at a 13%, and we had to mention it. Also the increase of availability of education, which we all can relate to after the COVID pandemic and the online education starting, and everybody were able to connect with their teachers, whether they were geographically separated, but they were able to still communicate and, transmit knowledge and communicate. That was something that these chatbots were used at an 11% score. There were other categories, but they were very hard to group up in one single category. So it came at a 19%, so I had to mention them because, but they were focused on 2 areas: promotion of teacher-student interaction, which tells you something about like when in education, you really need to focus on the relationship. That's what we are mainly processing day to day. And that would come up later. I want you to focus on that part. And also inclusivity. There were other domains that were focused in these 74 studies that were collected in that study. These 4 domains varied, but the one that I would mention was learning. 49% of the 74 studies were focused on learning. And learning in what? In language acquiring or acquiring a new language. These chatbots, and I believe some of you have at least dabbled in some AI or some application that help them learn a new language, or maybe Google Translate. It's on its own. It's one aid that we cannot resort from not using, especially when you travel. Language learning scored at 53% of the 74 studies, and that showed that it was really influential using these chatbots in teaching a new language. From all of these, findings, the researchers tried to find which domain was highly connected with which objective, and they found out that the learning domain was connected highly with the skill improvement, which is also intuitive to the mind. When you think about it, it's just natural. When you try to teach a student a new skill, then definitely you are helping them learn something. That was the connection. That was the strongest connection that was there. So if we would like to take that and apply it, or apply it, on ChatGPT, we would find 3 areas: skills, assisting, and mentoring. As I said, I still don't believe in mentoring, but I have to mention it. But when we go to skills, we can think of how to apply it in classroom settings, especially in higher education, and help our students think of it critically. And for assisting, finding resources. And I believe some of us are still, are already using them, because you use Google, don't you? Who doesn't use Google? I know it's blasphemy. You must have your Google at some point. But so you're using AI every day, but ChatGPT rose some red flags, so we will come to that in a minute. In critical thinking, I ran this question with ChatGPT because I read the article line by line. So I asked it to give me an exact example about motivation, since I'm so skeptical of it. And guess what? It gave me a very logical answer. There's not a single mistake in grammar or the way it looks, but there wasn't a single name of these names mentioned in the paper. And there were plenty of names, believe me. And I thought, well, that would give us a nice way to test our students, but in a very interactive way. So if you bring the entire article, print out the article and provide it to your students, and then provide the text that ChatGPT provided or generated, and ask them to fish for mistakes, then you have made sure that your students use ChatGPT in the right way, so they can see where was the mistake, and eventually your human brain will prevail after all. Another way in assisting or finding resources, I asked for for ChatGPT to find resources on the current status of higher education with the new wave of chatbots in education. And there have been plenty of studies. As I mentioned, this literature review has just provided 74, but there were plenty more. And it gave nice, detailed, coherent, logical, answers. But when I highlighted one of them and I searched it in Google, it wasn't there. So it's the same thing. You can use it to help students find it. And by the way, Dr. Hussain will provide a wonderful resource for how to check if your students use ChatGPT for their essays, to check for plagiarism, for incidents like these. So you can join these 2 steps together, and that would really help and, catch your students on the spots. But but saying that, I won't talk about motivation because I still need a lot of convincing to do so. So, but if you think about it, because everybody is thinking of their major anxiety is cheating. What is our standpoint on cheating? Every day, in everyday life, when we have any question that pops up to our mind, we look into Google. We do it personally. So when you come to the ethical question of asking yourself, why should I prohibit my students from using Google in my classroom? I think we fall into the duplicity of the matter, that we allow ourselves more than we believe, and we restrain our students from doing the same. That is why I thought we really need to reconsider our positions in higher academy, in higher education. We still look at ourselves as the sage, the teacher as a sage, and we are the higher authority in the classroom, where we should just render, information, and people should just take it in as it is and not even question us. Some of them are out there. I hope none of you are here from that kind of mentality, but there are some who do believe such education should be preserved. Therefore, talking about the relationships that I mentioned earlier, ChatGPT or any chatbot or AI uses false relationships. It's not real, no matter how authentic it looks. We can base our invest in that kind of strong bonding between us and our students, and try to evaluate our students on their growth perspective instead of just the end result and finding, ourselves just teaching for the test. So to end that, just to say how we would do that, it's simply by you can revisit how you favored your favorite teacher, their teaching style, and what you really want your students to come out with from your classroom. If you go into that, you'll find out that there is always one common element, and that is having students share the same resources that you have, or you had, or all the privileged students that know about everything else before they even walked into the academy, and those who come from humble backgrounds and they don't really know that much. So that's my, little contribution about what we can do with ChatGPT in education. I hope you agree. If you don't tell me. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
When we are querying or asking ChatGPT, are we using somebody else's brain? Is that something that we are trying to do? To answer this question, let me take you through the evolution of AI. So in the old days, just computers came around, and they were just a bunch of digital circuits which had some intellectual property to them. So somebody sat there and designed digital circuits, and we gave them instructions to do computations. And later on, when we had the internet, the idea of search came out. So with search, we are no longer just talking about data here. We are extracting data from other people and then producing some of the information that they have been able to freely make them available over the internet. So the search is, let's say, the biggest contribution to AI that we are all using, and it's not that complicated as much as the language model that Dr. Mohammad was talking about. It's basically a ranking algorithm that ranks the resources over the internet and shows them to you somehow based on some of those ranks. After that, we had this intermediate step. I think most of us are familiar with this. So voice commands came, and which were the result of using natural language processing, which is NLP. So in this case, the user interface changed. So the old people not familiar with computers can now just give a voice command, and hopefully Alexa or Siri or Google can provide a response. So it's basically providing that voice command or natural language analysis over the information available from the web. So nothing new. With ChatGPT or the language models, LLM, large language models, we are interested in the third component. That's not just data or information. We are also interested in knowledge. So ChatGPT is trying, or any other language model is trying to connect the dots. So you search through this and that and get pages here and there, and then you connect the dots. Now we are making conclusions. But ChatGPT or a language model is supposed to do that for you. And ChatGPT is not alone today. We have Llama from Meta, we have Lambda from Google. These are the competition that recently came out. So this is the new level, the next generation AI that we are dealing with. This is going towards the direction that was described by this man. This is John Lennox, the British mathematician and philosopher, which described the first parts that I was talking about as narrow AI, which provides some utility using those fancy AI tools. But what he is predicting that we are doing or we are going for is the artificial general intelligence, which is basically having a replacement brain. So some system that would replace human brain to connect not just connecting the dots, now to be to provide innovation as well. So this is what we are trying to do. So I'm trying to zoom out from all the details that were provided by Dr. Mohammad and Dr. Fawzeyah. Now I'm not a philosopher, but talking about ethics, we should compare some of the ethical theories that are out there. So we have two main areas that we are interested in. One is deontology, which actions are taken as they are, regardless of what they are producing. So they could be right or wrong. And then we have the other side of the aisle, which is the consequentialism, which describes or views our actions based on the consequences of what we are doing. So is the outcome something that benefits humanity if we slightly violate ethics, for example? That could be something that we talk about here, but deontologists wouldn't get into that. So are we really using someone else's data here or someone else's brain to do something good about it? Is Microsoft or OpenAI allowed to commercially benefit from the data available to ChatGPT? And to what extent can we utilize those? These are I don't have complete answers to these. These are still being debated in the scientific community, but we can just get a glimpse of what the problem is. So the sources that were used to train these models were the web, some books, computer programs, conversations. Now these are public data, but when we put data over the internet, did we subscribe to a language model? Did we agree to having a language model trained on our thoughts and be used and then be commercially available to other users? That's a question. So many could say no, many could say yes. And what the consequences would be would just make the ethical differences here. Does ChatGPT cite its sources, as Dr. Mohammad was mentioning? It doesn't. Can ChatGPT be directed to employ censorship? For example, hide some of the content or knowledge from some particular region of the world and show it to some others? Can it provide false knowledge? Of course it can, as the examples were shown before me. Actually, this has been the subject of great debate recently. The Vint Cerf, which is the Turing Award winner, the equivalent of the Nobel Prize in computer science, had the same doubts about language models. So these are all based on false information. Sometimes false information, sometimes correct information producing false knowledge. And then also there is the privacy part that can come into picture, given the developments that we are expecting in future. So I would just briefly go over these privacy concerns and some of the security problems. So can language models be used as surveillance? That's something that could be very worrisome. It's impossible to encrypt systems like this. because of their nature and because of their volume. Can they be subject to adversarial input? That is a subject of, in my community, in security community, we are heavily discussing these problems, that AI could be subject to attack, that can change its predictions. So is a language model vulnerable to these problems? Of course it can be. And is it open to data leaks? So if you are talking to ChatGPT and providing some personal information to it, and can that get into its training, and then can that be later on leaked somehow somewhere? So this is a reference to a 2021 paper by mostly people from Google that were able to extract training data from language models. So the data that was used to train the model, as Dr. Mohammad was describing, was simply queried from the system. So basic idea would be that you put a bunch of carefully crafted queries for the language model, and then do a probabilistic analysis and try to come up with the original data that trained the model. So that's the data leak part. And the personalization part, of course, ChatGPT doesn't want to do that. I was talking to ChatGPT, asking, can you learn something from me? It said, yes, I can. And then I offered to give ChatGPT secrets about people, and then it refused to accept that. So that's pretty ethical. So, and then I asked, okay, what do you exactly do when you interact with people? I would do such and such and such. So I'm programmed to maintain confidentiality of individuals, but I also do personalization. So I would use your preferences and then tailor answers to that. So which one is it? Is ChatGPT consistent? Is it honest? Is it evil? We don't know. So probably the underlying data was very evil. So that is a consistency problem with ChatGPT. Some very brief possible use cases. It could be used as a search for ideas and concepts and methods. It can be fairly good in some areas, not good in some other areas. It can be used as an instructor to learn new things. Can be used as a planner that doesn't harm anyone, so it's not false knowledge, so it could be used there. It cannot be used as a ghostwriter, whether or not we are a consequentialist or a deontologist. It cannot be used as a programmer, and it cannot do everything for you. And it cannot be cited as a source. There is a gray area which is being dealt with publishers, which is ChatGPT as a co-author. And there was a person who actually did that. So published a paper, and ChatGPT is the co-author with him. So there is this reference that talks about the ethical dilemmas, and I know at least Elsevier is now preventing specifying ChatGPT as a co-author. So these are the ChatGPT detectors that Dr. Fawzeyah was giving you the spoiler about them. So ChatGPT detectors are quite few there. One is actually from OpenAI. So it can tell you if a text was produced by AI or not. Finally, I would leave you with one thing. I did a very little experiment with the OpenAI ChatGPT detector. So I asked ChatGPT, tell me something about John Lennox, which I was referring to in my earlier slides. And some profile came out. And then I took that profile to OpenAI's detector, and it was classified as AI, which is fine. And then I slightly modified that and said, but is this really a problem? How can AI proceed with concerns blocking the way? And then it was again classified as AI. So my minor change in size and in meaning did not make any difference for the detector. And then I changed my modification, pretty much the same size, but the meaning was very different. So John is a devout Christian and views problems faced by humanity from a Christian's viewpoint, and this was not classified as AI. Just a very simple sentence added to a long text, from ChatGPT. So the one and the first one did the trick, the other one did not. So if you are planning to use it, there could be a student that is smart enough to just do the modification, and ChatGPT is very vulnerable to that. So I'll leave you with that.